Welcome to our second Capital Budget Deliberative Forum. My name is Sally Stadelman from Mayor Peduto's office, and I want to say welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and be civically engaged. This is a really important process. Your feedback is crucial in the creation of the capital budget. All of the feedback that you give us today goes in front of our directors and is also published in the 2018 capital budget. So that being said, the most important thing you will do this evening is filling out your survey. You will receive a survey at the end of the deliberation. So please, 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 you'll have some time when the meeting's over. Please fill that out, put your ideas on there. You can attach a piece of scrap paper if you have a whole lot more you want to share, but I can't emphasize how important that is to fill out that survey. I also want to say thank you to Councilwoman Gross for joining us this evening, as well as Erica Strasburger, our representative from Councilman Gilman's office. With that, I'm going to turn the mic over to David Hutchinson. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Can everybody hear? No? I'll lean in as close as I can. Actually, yeah, let's do this one. Thank you.
Maybe turn this. Here, I'll just take it.
Thank you. My name is David Hutchinson. I work for the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget. I manage the capital budget along with Brenda Katikia and our director, Jen Prezzuti. Our Chief Financial Officer, Sam Ashbaugh, is here as well. I want to start by thanking the Third Presbyterian Church for letting us use this beautiful space. I also want to thank the City Channel. They're going to be broadcasting this hearing. Also, I really want to thank our volunteer moderators for spending time both in training and also during this actual deliberative forum. It really helps you guys focus on the conversation, and we appreciate all the work that they do. Most importantly, I want to thank you guys, the audience, for coming out. Hot rain is not my favorite weather, so I appreciate the sacrifice some of you made on buses and bikes and all kinds of ways that you did to get here. So tonight, as Sally said, we are going to have our second deliberative forum for the 2018 capital budget. Chapter 218 of City Code requires the city to hold these meetings in order to solicit perspectives from the public on the city's capital budget process. The capital budget is where the city plans and performs work on our infrastructure, the long-term investments we make in parks, playgrounds, buildings, and other assets. This is a great opportunity for city officials to hear from you, the citizens, at the outset of the capital budget process. We really want your opinions and perspectives to be integral to the creation of the 2018 capital budget. The participatory approach in these meetings uses small group discussions and questions and answers to the expert panel to help you better understand the city's goals and the capital budget process, and also to get necessary feedback from you. So let's get started. Sally went over a brief itinerary for tonight, but just to double check, we're going to do an overview of the capital budget process. Then we're going to break out into small group discussions. We're going to have a chance for some questions and answers from a really great panel. And also we are going to ask again that you do the feedback survey. How we use the survey, we're going to get into in just a few slides. First, it's really important for us to define three key terms that we use often when talking about the capital budget. The first one is priorities. These are an expression of Mayor Peduto's values. Set by the mayor, these help the departments understand what the mayor wants to see in the capital budget. The second is projects. This is how priorities are made real. These are the actual physical things we plan to do with your tax dollars. Last but not least, we have plans. These really are important in setting the table for a long-term vision, both for neighborhoods, individual parks, and the city as a whole. In some cases, we plan out 5 or 6 years. Behind the scenes, we have sometimes a 20 or 30 plan, depending upon the type of asset. So the capital budget process itself started about a month ago. We got priorities from the mayor. We were able to distribute those to the department heads and the council members, and part of that was also sending them a request for proposals. In June, we have our 2 capital budget hearings, which you're a part of right now. July 1st is our deadline for proposals. We want to make sure that all the council members and all the department heads get their proposals in by July 1st. Throughout August, the Capital Program Facilitation Committee, which includes members of our office, also the City Controller, also the City Council Budget Office, we meet throughout that month and talk to the directors, the project managers, the stakeholders to figure out what the best use of city funds are with these capital projects. In November, the mayor proposes a capital budget, and in December, council has an opportunity to amend the budget and do a final vote. The budget is then effective January 1st of 2018. So these are the mayor's 2018 capital budget priorities. I know they're a little bit hard to read, so I'll go through them. The first one is leveraging partnerships. We want to enhance Pittsburgh's infrastructure through coordinated community stakeholders on outreach, design, and fundraising for capital projects. I think Pittsburgh is incredibly lucky to have some really active community organizations and larger partnerships that really do a lot of great work within the public sphere. We want to do a better job of joining efforts with them so we have a better understanding of the division of labor. They can focus on helping us with grant writing, with outreach to the community, and with fundraising, and we can focus on the things that we do well. Also, we want to keep building out a complete streets network. The really important part of that is that we want to provide safe, convenient, and comfortable routes for all citizens to access job centers, regardless of your mode of transportation. So in that instance, we really want to kind of keep extending the network that we do have, or to connect to links that aren't currently connected, as opposed to doing one disparate piece that's maybe way far off and not connected to anything else. Also, we want to establish a baseline of core infrastructure so that all neighborhoods can have safe, accessible public spaces. So no matter where you live, you should have good sidewalks, you should have safe streets and streetlights. Also, with stability and growth, we want to make sure that we are using public dollars to invest in neighborhoods in need. In this instance, we want to have the opportunity to really build value in communities to help stabilize home values and help those neighborhoods grow in an organic way. Lastly, but certainly not least, we want to invest strategically using data. We want to do that front-end work with plans and assessments to make sure we have the right investments for the life cycle of an asset. Also, we want to make sure that we're considering the operating impact of a capital project. A good example of this is an asset management system that we've recently, I guess it's about 18 months now, started using. It really helps us set reminders for inspections on our assets. We can store warranty information, and we can have a full history of the service on a specific asset. When it comes to evaluating capital budget proposals, there are a number of factors that the Capital Program Facilitation Committee considers. The first one is, does the proposed project resolve an imminent threat to public or employee safety or health? We want to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe, both employees and citizens. The second one is, does it achieve compliance with federal or state statutory mandates? We also, number 3 is a big one. We look for opportunities to leverage additional non-city funds. That can be in the form of a foundation grant, it can be in the form of a federal grant. There are a number of opportunities we have to really go after other people's money. Fourth, we want to make sure that we're considering the impact on the operating budget and potential operating savings. A good example of this is when we switch to LED streetlights. They help us decrease our energy bills. Also, we want to make sure that we're improving the quality of life. We want to make sure we're improving efficiency or effectiveness of service delivery. We can do that in a number of ways. One project that recently kind of did both of these things was we had the trash can sensors that helped us create custom routes for our trash collection. So not only did we get to skip the cans that were not full enough for us to pick up, but also it tells us if the can is full and needs to be picked up twice that day, we can go back a second time and do that. We want to make sure that we're improving quality of life in all city neighborhoods, and that kind of goes back to our core baseline of infrastructure. We also want to make sure that the projects that are being proposed have your support as community members. So there's some really great project managers who are able to talk to you guys directly in community meetings and get your feedback on things. That is really important when we're considering the projects. Last but not least, we want to make sure that we are complying with the comprehensive plan developed by the Department of City Planning and any other plans that have been adopted for that neighborhood or that asset. The planning documents are really important because they involve your voice in the beginning, at the very outset of something. So we want to make sure that we're honoring all of the things that the community really values. Departments in City Council will submit their proposals. We will evaluate them as the Capital Program Facilitation Committee. And then the team will look at how well the projects meet the criteria to make sure that the project is a good use of city money. We'll then rank the projects based on the scores, and the mayor and city council will receive the rankings. Taking those rankings into consideration, the mayor can then introduce the budget which we also call the Capital Improvement Plan. This includes both projects we plan to do in 2018, but also things going from 2019 all the way out to 2023. Council reviews the plans, they can make changes, then they ultimately pass the budget. So tonight, what's going to happen with what we're doing? First of all, your survey results are going to be published in the capital budget. If you get a chance, there should be one on every single table. You can see in the summary in the beginning of the budget, we summarize the data from our 2 meetings from last year. Also, all of your responses are scanned and shared with the departments and the council offices. We'll show you an example of how that happens in just a little bit. In terms of your questions for the expert panel, those also can be shared with the departments and the council offices, and tonight they're going to be broadcast on the city channel. So this is an example of a survey from last year. What I actually end up doing is I go through, I scan them all into one PDF, and then wherever it seems to match up with an existing capital budget project, I tag it. I then create a second document that has page numbers for all of the applicable projects. So the first example is streetscape and intersection improvements. The second column actually has the departments that usually work on those kind of projects, and the third column is the page numbers. So if you work on streetscape projects, you know you can look at page 2, 11, 12, 16, et cetera, to see the actual responses that people provided in meetings just like this. This year, I also took a look at what we got last year for feedback. On the right-hand side, you can see our survey responses, and these are the proposed projects that people said they wanted to see happening in the 2017 budget. I took all of those and I assigned them to the appropriate department based on the categories in the capital budget, and I compared it to how we actually funded the 2017 capital budget. I think they match up pretty well. There are a few different things there. One is administration and subaward. Those are a lot of projects that are funded by federal money and grant money, so they're not really something that's in the forefront of people's minds. Also, in terms of vehicles, not the sexiest thing in the world, but you have to make sure that we have cars for police officers and dump trucks and all that fun stuff. And then also in terms of engineering and construction, we're actually now looking at the ways in which we can make operating changes to increase our staff to execute more and more capital projects for engineering and construction. So tonight there's kind of 3 central questions we really want you to consider. The first is, how well do you think the priorities identified by the mayor will address the needs of the city and the needs of you and your neighbors? What other priorities might you add to the list? The second is, what type of capital projects do you think will be most helpful to the city and your neighborhood in the coming year? And this can be whatever you think should happen. It can be the rehab of a pool. It can be the building of a new playground. Whatever you think is important, this is what that question is for. The second one is, what specific needs would you and your neighbors like the city to address in the coming year? So if there's something more general that you would like the city to address, feel free to put that in there. Tonight, we are lucky to have some great subject matter experts, both from our own office. City Planning is here, Innovation and Performance that does a lot of our tech projects, our new Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Also, we have permits, licenses, and inspections, the Urban Redevelopment Authority, and then also we have 2 former members of DPW if you have any questions about Public Works. So what can you do after this meeting to further engage with the capital budget? The first is Bird's Eye View. I don't know if anybody's been on Bird's Eye View yet. It's a really fun map-based interface that has got different overlays or layers. So you can look at recent 311s, you can look at police blotter information, and now for this year you can also look at capital projects. So you can see what the dollar amounts are budgeted, you can see what the update is on that capital project that's happening in your neighborhood. 311 is also a great resource, both calling them, and you can also tweet at PGH 311. That's what I use. If I see something amiss, or field goals are in the wrong spot on the soccer field, I just tweet 311. That's a really efficient way to get to city officials. We also have the Myberg app, which I rely on heavily to know when to take out recycling. We have the Pittsburgh Council Budget Office, which we have Mike Strelick's here tonight from that. They have a great library of our prior capital budgets and operating budgets as well. You can also email our office at cip@pittsburghpa.gov. You can also reach out to your own council office or the council budget office. Let's turn it back over to Sally. Thank you.
Thank you for that informative presentation. With that, we are turning you over to your moderators. So at this time, we're going to start the question and answer period with our expert panel. Before we begin, I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves. You can say your name and title slowly and clearly so everyone can hear you. I'll come down here. You know what? Actually, I will direct you to your mic on your table. We want to send it down to Tom. And then I will be coming around with a microphone for each table to ask their question. All right,
Ready?
you're up.
So my name's Tom Link. I work for the City of Pittsburgh's Urban Redevelopment Authority. My title is Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship for the URA. That means that I cover all of the URA's work as it regards to business startup, business expansion, business attraction, and a variety of efforts in support of our ecosystem to support those very types of companies here in the city of Pittsburgh. So I hope I'm an expert for you.
My name is Jen Pursuti. I'm the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, and it's our office that works with city departments and council members to craft the capital budget.
Hi, I'm Ray Gastel. I'm Director of the Department of City Planning.
Hi, Sam Ashbaugh, the city's Chief Financial Officer.
And I'm Lee Haller. I'm the Director of Innovation and Performance. It's my team that is responsible for 311, the city cable channel. We also have the analytics and strategy team that's created applications like Bird's Eye View, which we've already mentioned earlier this evening.
I'm Mike Strelick. I work in the City Council Budget Office. I work with and for all the City Council members.
Hi, I'm Maura Kennedy. I'm the Director of the Department of Permits, Licenses, and Inspections, which does construction permitting and inspection, as well as business licensing and inspection of existing buildings to make sure that they're being maintained appropriately.
Good evening, I'm Patrick Hassett. I'm an Assistant Director with the new Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, coming over from the Department of Public Works, where I oversee the engineering and construction in the city of Pittsburgh, particularly in regards to the right-of-way.
All right, thank you, panelists, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Can't emphasize enough how much expertise we have sitting up in front of us tonight. So tables, I hope you have some good questions for us. With that, table number 1, you are up. Do you need a minute? Should I go?
My question is, does the city have a comprehensive inventory of all the properties it owns, including houses that are not being lived in? If not, is such an inventory being created right now? And how does the city plan to sell or make use of these assets post-haste, considering that many of them are in a deteriorating state?
That is an excellent question. The city does have a complete inventory of all of its facilities, of all the city-owned facilities. We also do have a complete inventory of all of our vacant structures that the city owns. And I don't know if there is a member that can speak to the disposition process for the actual real estate portion of the city's assets. Sam, do you want to take that one?
So, yeah, as Jen alluded to, so when you look at the city's assets, it's not only the city facilities like our rec centers, police stations and such, where we provide services out of, but there's also a lot of property, which I think was part of your question, maybe delinquent houses or that came onto the city's tax rolls, and now we have thousands and thousands of those properties that we're looking to dispose of throughout the year as well. Yes.
Okay, thank you, panelists. And table number 1, we are going to go to table number 2 for your question.
Hi. Our first question is, how can the city leverage the Port Authority partnership for bus lanes downtown to try to achieve its budget priority of complete streets?
Heather, you want to start and then back?
Well, I'll just note that I'm going to pass it on down to Pat Hassett from DOMI, and just note that, the complete streets policy, as you say, is a city goal, and that in achieving the bus lanes and other goals, we are looking at the downtown. We've looked at it for some time, but are really beginning to look at it seriously now with the Port Authority. From the Department of City Planning's perspective, it's really making sure that it works from a land use perspective in terms of how that will operate, but it also has to, I think the DOMI can speak a little bit more on how it's going to work from a systems perspective. But we do have a strong partnership with the Port Authority. They are open and ready to address the bus lanes downtown. It's just that we have to sort of work together to make sure there's a good direction on that. Pat, would you want to add to that?
Yeah, the director is right. We have a long-standing relationship, at least at the staff level for sure, which is where it's important. And we're all on the same page in terms of where we want to go with the downtown and understand the importance of buses. We also understand that we own the streets. The streets are the city streets. In fact, their bus stop locations are our call. And so there's a mutual dependency we have with the Port Authority being able to reduce traffic and provide the services that we need for our constituents, but they need the infrastructure that we have. And so we are working hand in hand with them and with a common interest of maximizing their service. The BRT is a joint process with both us and the Port Authority. So there are ways both institutionally as well as in reality in terms of the infrastructure that we're able to establish and maintain an effective relationship with the Port Authority.
Any other panelists have input? Good. All right. Thank you, Pat. We're going to go to table number 3. And let me mention, so since we're doing so well, we should have the opportunity to go through and answer an additional round of questions from tables 2. So.
Hi. So if HUD decides to cut or more likely reduce CDBG funds over the next 4 to 8 years, does the city have a plan B for the hole that's going to be created in the budget? And if so, is there any sort of hierarchy of what gets funded and what doesn't?
Well, the first thing just to note is that we did get our 2017 allocations, and actually we came in a little bit higher than our estimate. We estimated 12.5 million, and we're doing a couple 100,000 better, I believe. And that was just released today or yesterday, if you can. I think it's online. The second part is we do have to work on a strategy for that. I think and there are, I think that perhaps I don't know if Director or Chief Ashbaugh or others want to sort of speak to the larger picture of the priorities. I think that what's going to happen is that we'll look at it through that lens of the capital priorities that were kind of set out just before, the 5 that were sort of this year's mayoral priorities, and then as well as looking at the sort of the standard ways that we look through that list of sort of for the capital committee review. But I think that we're going to try and use the information we have on where the greatest need is. I think you saw that in the sort of, and we'll set up a kind of a hierarchy that's we'll probably work on a hierarchy that's sort of the CDBG one. We'll have to sort of develop really a similar kind of framework, which we're talked about, but I can't say that we have it in place right now. It's something that I've been talking with my department, because I have 12 about 12 people that are actually part of that as well, that administer those funds. So, and I think, for example, you would have to look at it through a kind of lens of some of the programs that are most people-centered, such as HOPWA, for housing for people with AIDS, look at the ones that are for emergency solutions grants, which is about 1.1 million. And I think I'm not saying that that's exactly the hierarchy where you would start, but I think there's some good ways to start thinking about the priorities in terms of the, probably to put it simply, people first in terms of the way we try and address it.
Yeah, that's certainly, and one of the things that we do well now in the city is actually do long-term financial planning, so we're actually required to. So not only when we're putting together, we just met with the mayor last week about preliminary projections for 2018, but we also do our projections for the next 5 years, and with that we say, here's our status quo forecast. Looks pretty good, but there are a number of uncertainties or risk areas, and that certainly is one of the ones that we've discussed. So as Director had alluded to, we we need to look at not only CDBG, but we also seen a little slowing in other grant opportunities. So our office also oversees state and federal grants other than CDBG. And so we haven't seen as much movement recently. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty in a lot of the program areas. But this also gives us an opportunity to start evaluating program effectiveness. So how do you prioritize? And it's not only about people, but are there programs that are getting a better return on investment for the what we've been allocating? So when we do have to make decisions, we are making data-informed decisions.
Yes.
And before we move on from that question, I'm very impressed that we are using the term CDBG. Thank you, Table 3. But just so we're all on the same page, can I have one of our panelists define what CDBG is for us in 5 sentences or less?
Sure, that stands for Community Development Block Grants, and then that's a federally funded program that has been in place for several decades to provide funds to local governments to enable them to advance social service and human-centered costs or programs such as housing, programs such as for people with disabilities and AIDS and other types of social development programs.
Thank you so much, Director Ashbaugh. All right, so table number 4, it is your turn to ask your question.
Thank you. So we talked mostly about communities and connectedness and how there are a lot of communities that don't have sidewalks, so it's hard for someone to leave their house and get to their neighbors and interact that way or get to a park. It's difficult for pedestrians who are waiting for a bus that don't really have a legitimate bus stop to wait at. Cyclists who don't have a safe way to get from A to B. There might be safe parts of it, but not the whole thing. And we talked about how there are multiple temporary solutions to things like automobile speeding, and you can put in police traps and those little neon guys with the flag and signs that say drive like your kids live here. But what we are more concerned with is what can the city do and how can the city use this budget to redesign our communities to make them feel more like communities.
A couple of different things on that. I think that I'm going to ask Pat Hassett to talk to some of the transportation issues, but one of the tools we have is that we can do neighborhood planning. And that's why we're really proud that we have got going with neighborhood planning in Homewood, Hazelwood, and Manchester. Manchester is just starting. All of these are pretty new, but Manchester is just coming online now. And that we'll also are working to have a sort of broader neighborhood initiative in which we find ways for neighborhoods to come together and additional communities to begin planning processes, and also to recognize their work and recognize the community organizations and find a way so that today we do recognize and respect communities in many ways, and when projects are reviewed at the Planning Commission, it's always brought up, have you spoken with the community and so forth. We're trying to also make sure that we make that more through the work that we're doing this year. And we're trying to make that more structured and more kind of like that it's not just a sort of recommended, but it's actually a requirement that you reach out to communities, and also that we find a way that community plans can also be accepted and or adopted by the Planning Commission. Though I think by going in that direction, it treats everyone with respect and sort of says that this is valued in a way that we will, and we hope that that'll help communities feel more like communities as we build that. There's a lot of great community organizations today, and we're not questioning that. We just think that we're working, and we've done a lot of workshopping with people to see if this is a way to really open up opportunities, but we think it is. And so that's one way. I think that the larger questions of how do you come together on I think in a small way, work that we already did on things like the Adopt-A-Lot, which was to allow community gardening to also have on city property to actually be recognized and sort of through a process that we felt was safe and appropriate. That's actually underway and working today, and we hope that we think of that as a community builder. So there's a number of programs that we have. I'm sure the folks at this table could list many more. On the sort of streets and sidewalks issues, these are critical, and they are also all part of what makes the community feel connected. It's certainly the philosophy of the Complete Streets that, like, the whole concept was it's places to be as well as to get from one place to another, but that didn't mean to say that getting from one place to another wasn't important. But I think that as we move forward on that, I don't know, if, Pat Hassett, do you want to sort of comment on where DOMI is sort of going and sort of leadership on this issue of how do we really help communities make sure that those core facilities of sidewalks, et cetera, become taken care of?
First, I'd agree with Director Castile is that we need to hear from the neighborhood in terms of what they want to do in their neighborhood. We're not going to dictate going into the neighborhood. But as it now stands, where we're approaching the investments in neighborhood infrastructure, whether it's sidewalks, streets, or steps, we do dictate safety issues. If there are safety issues, we don't set up public meetings and discuss it. We go out and take action to resolve the safety issues. But beyond that, we're looking for opportunities to create some equity out there in the modal infrastructure where the pedestrian, the cyclists, and the motorists all have their share of the right-of-way. We're looking for equity in terms of accessibility, whether it's the ADA accessible handicapped or services for the residents. So we're looking to implement those types of improvements related to the transportation infrastructure. STEPS is a great example of a piece of infrastructure that has gone sadly neglected over the past decades. And we are looking to reinvigorate our STEP program because we realize that there are key connections for these neighborhoods. Some of these neighborhoods rely on those steps. That's the type of infrastructure improvements that we're looking at that cut across the spectrum of neighborhood quality of life, accessibility, bringing a sub-deficient mode of transportation up to par with the other modes. But it does all begin with, as Director Goodsteele says, with the neighborhood, communicating with the neighborhood, figuring out what your particular issues are, and coming to bear with a capital budget to invest in those issues, whether it's additional sidewalks, handicap ramps, more bus stops, less bus stops, different bus routes, bridges, or steps. It all begins with a conversation and a plan from the neighborhood. And this administration now recognizes that and uses the complete street models as a forum for that discussion with the neighborhoods as to how to make their neighborhoods and their infrastructure much more agreeable to what the neighborhoods are looking for in terms of their quality of life.
All right. Thank you for that wonderful answer. So we do have a solid 10 or 15 minutes left, so I would like to give the tables an opportunity to ask a second question if they have one. So starting with table number 1.
Hi. Our question is regarding one of the priorities, the one that says establishing a baseline of core infrastructure so that all neighborhoods can have safe, accessible public spaces. We'd like to know, do you have defined baselines, as in articulated standards based on specific qualities or quantitative aspects, whether that be cracks in a sidewalk or percentage of a stairway that's unsafe to traverse, or something that's laid out in the most concrete terms possible, how some aspect of infrastructure meets a baseline. Are there defined baselines? The secondary question is, what constitutes public spaces?
Oh, I got the mic.
I'll do the public spaces. Okay.
You do the baseline. You start with public spaces while I think about that.
So public spaces, I think that, gosh, if I'm not mistaken, that streets are at least 10% of the city's square mileage. If we were 55 square miles. I think that it is actually our largest public asset. And so I'd say that the public right-of-way is one area that's defined as public space. I think that the parks and the sort of those kind of properties that you would expect are also defined as public space. I think that there are, in general, there are sort of sometimes on private property easements and other requirements that to be open to the public. Sometimes plazas and so forth have those kinds of requirements, but they're not, they can sometimes be referred to as privately owned public space. We have some of that, though not a great deal of that. And I think that those are the core public spaces. I mean, our facilities are not, they are owned by the public and they are public property, but they may not all be accessible to the public. I think that in addition, in public space, what's defined as public space, generally the goal is to have it as open to all members of the public as possible, but as with the regulation of roadways themselves, it's not open at all times to all people in all ways. But those are the core definitions of it that I know of, and I think that we actually we're fortunate in Pittsburgh to have actually a great collection of parks and public spaces and streets, and the job is to make them better and more usable for the public. Does that answer your question?
It answers the second one.
All right, so we'll go on to the first.
We need the first one repeated.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes? Okay, here.
Well, let's see if I can say it the same way twice. This question regards the terminology of baseline of core infrastructure. When you say baseline, we would like to know, are there articulated standards for different aspects of the infrastructure that says when something has met a baseline quality? That could be, for example, sidewalks must be this high and not have this many cracks, or this many square feet missing, or stairways, or trash collection must occur this often, or what have you. Are there defined, articulated standards for whether something will meet some baseline for different aspects of infrastructure?
Do you know how big that question is? So let me give you partial answers. Yes, there are some baselines, and there are baselines relative to construction standards and performance standards. And the best example is in your traffic signals at your intersections. There are construction standards that we need to have met in terms of the location of the poles, where the location of the signals, the stoplights themselves, the push buttons have to be in a certain distance from the handicap ramps. They have to be handicap ramps. Those are pretty clear construction standards. There are also some operational standards in terms of how long you're supposed to wait, left turns, right turns, how long the pedestrian signal operates. So those are pretty clear performance standards as well as construction standards, and that's an easy example. It gets a little more wishy-washy when you start talking about convenience and connectivity. We don't really have a baseline for what constitutes a convenient access to a grocery store, what constitutes connectivity between one use and another use. That gets a little more abstract when we start talking about that. When we look at the infrastructure, we're looking at, like I mentioned before, safety. There are pretty clear standards of safety that we try to meet in terms of accident rates, accident types. There's also, speeding. We have specific standards relative to the 85th percentile speed. So there are some standards of safety that we try to meet, and we try to monitor and keep close tabs on that. But after safety, we get into performance, and there are some standards of performance in the infrastructure that we look at in terms of structural integrity of a bridge or a stairway, structural integrity of poles, and structural integrity of the roadway, the potholes. There are some standards there. But then we get into quality of life, convenience, and connectivity, and that's where the baseline becomes a little more abstract, and that's where it kind of falls apart. So we do have some baselines. Now, the more important question is to what extent are we able to monitor, measure, and apply those baselines? And that's where we're working on trying to develop a more rigorous information structure for us to be able to monitor and react to our relationship to those baselines. So the baselines are, to a large extent, out there. It's a matter of tying into those baselines and using them more accordingly in the planning of our infrastructure improvements. Okay.
Anyone have anything additional to add to?
Yeah, I can just give a pretty concrete example. As Director Hassett mentioned, one of the things that we've been working on over the last several years is standing up an asset management system, right, where all of the assets that are city-owned, like our roadways, our steps, our buildings, our parks, our playgrounds, are cataloged in a database. And the work that we do against those assets is recorded so that we know the history of what we've done on those assets, what we've invested in them. And then the other thing that we've tried to do is establish inspection criteria that are tied to each of those assets, right? So pavement is an example. And we worked with a vendor to inspect all 17,000 street segments that the city owns and is responsible for maintaining. And they do that on a very specific scale. So they're looking for very specific distresses in the pavement. So if there's cracks, if there's potholes, if there's joint erosion on a concrete street, things like that. They use all of those different distresses to come up with a score on a scale from 0 to 100. So we now have a score for all 17,000 street segments, and then that information allows us to set very concrete baselines for when we invest in those assets. So hopefully that gives you a good example.
All right, thank you for those excellent answers, panelists. Thank you for that question, Table 1. Table 2, do you have an additional question?
Okay, so this is about the problem that we've had with lead pipes. We just want to see if you could clarify if that is the responsibility of the WSA, what our relationship with it is with them, and if we can use some of the capital budget to update the infrastructure for that.
Yeah, so the city owns the infrastructure, the asset, but it's been leased to the PWSA since I think it was like the early 90s. So they are responsible for all the investment in the capital investment in the actual infrastructure. And we're actually currently, we just hired a firm jointly between the city and PWSA to do a comprehensive assessment of the organization. So not only from a governance perspective, operations, looking at funding, capital investment, and other aspects of the organization, customer service, to develop recommendations by the end of the year on how to really improve the organization. But to your direct point, all the city does actually provide a lot of services to support them. So a lot of the investments in green infrastructure that the city has done. So it is a partnership. But when you look out, if somebody's replacing a pipe in your street, that's PWSA and their contractors. But the city, not only through, like I said, the green infrastructure, through the capital budget, but also through a lot of other services that the Department of Public Works provides, as well as public safety. When there's an emergency, they're involved in helping to address those things as well.
All right, table number 3, would you like to ask a second question?
So how do we prioritize the needs of the neighborhoods? So obviously we have a lot of we have the strategy priorities, then we have the actual stuff that we're going to be doing, the tactics. How is that prioritized by need as far as neighborhoods that maybe have underserved communities versus neighborhoods like the one that we're actually sitting in right now?
Actually, the very first part of the core part of your question, I didn't hear the very first sentence.
How does the city, as far as committing to some of these projects and what the capital budget is actually funding, how do you prioritize which neighborhoods you're going to be going into to commit to projects? Is that clear?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think that a few of us will probably answer that. I mean, I'd say that on the neighborhood planning side of getting neighborhood planning going, we actually did have a legislation that identified priority neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods of need, and that the communities where we're working are responsive to that those were identified as neighborhoods that were in need neighborhoods that, beyond just the category of being CDBG eligible, which is a sort of a percentage of low and moderate income, but also looking a little further, and that's why we're working in Homewood and Hazelwood and we're at Manchester, and we'll continue to be looking at that. I think there's any number of other factors that go into other capital project decision-making, which I think in terms of which neighborhoods and how that goes, I think maybe someone, I don't know if it's Chief Ashbaugh or someone else who should sort of address that more broadly. Okay.
Yeah, and I think, it is a difficult choice because there's limited funds and there's a lot of needs out there, not only on our core infrastructure, but neighborhood, economic, housing development. But one of the things I think is important, we've started doing this a couple years ago, is actually show where your capital dollars are spent. And so if you look in the capital budget, you can actually see, because a lot of the times you heard criticism, well, we never spend any money in this neighborhood, or this neighborhood gets all the money, or this council district doesn't get funding. But if you actually go and look and peel back the layers of the onion, and you actually get to see that the capital investment is pretty well spread throughout the city. Of course, there are some areas where we're maybe investing more in facilities one year. If those are concentrated in one or more neighborhoods or parts of the city, that may be disproportional. If there are major projects like major investments in Larimer, for instance, over the last few years, where we got significant federal dollars, that's going to skew the whole allocation of the capital funds. But it is a deliberative process. It takes a lot of feedback, not only from these sessions, council members. So all members of council, as well as city departments, submit capital budget requests. And I think it's also important to know, we were just talking before while everyone was deliberating, how we've actually seen over the last few years actual projects move as a result of these forums. So people have come and, a couple years ago talked about major problems on the south side with bike lanes or whatever the issue was, and then through the process, people spoke and people understood that those are important not only to this neighborhood but to a lot of other neighborhoods, and so those things rose up and people saw them as a priority.
I'll just chime in from the PLI perspective, which deals with vacant property and targeted demolition. So while the city does not own the majority of vacant properties and vacant structures in Pittsburgh, we own the problem. So how are we going to work together with the community to have outcomes on those properties to meet the neighborhood's overall goals? Obviously, some of them are to achieve public safety goals. Is a structure actually falling down and could be a risk? Is it a target for arson or criminal activity? Are there some sort of baseline public safety goals we need to accomplish there? But there's also a lot of other planning around what is a correct outcome for those properties. Pittsburgh has lost almost half of its population from its height, and we're growing again, but how do we stabilize those properties in the meantime while we accomplish the appropriate out use? So working with communities to say, okay, are we going to drive this back to green space? Are we going to build stormwater retention facilities? Are we going to do community gardens? Are we going to try to redevelop it through some sort of targeted redevelopment program with the URA? Are we going to force it to the market? And this is something where it's just stuck in a cycle of ownership where perhaps the original owner for whatever reason has walked away and it's in a neighborhood that could be prime for market redevelopment, and rather than the city expending its dollars on maintaining that property, let's have the market take care of it. So trying to, again, work with the community to craft the correct outcome, and then use the various forces that all of my colleagues have talked about to guide it to that outcome.
Thank you. All right, table number 4. Do you have a question you would like to ask? Here you are.
Yes. I live in Squirrel Hill. We have a problem at the yeshiva schools where the cars are flying from the park past our schools. I've tried to slow them down. It's hard. I am the security officer there. Who do I talk to so we need to get blinking school zone lights up there, because the regular signs, you might as well not even have them there. It's a joke.
I will have to borrow that. And thank you for your question.
Yeah, you called the Department of Public Works and asked for the traffic division. Yeah, now there are certain regulations regarding those signs. We'd have to know the specific status of your school and the hours. Has anybody talked to you about those signs?
I talked to someone that was down there, and it's like,
Well, I understand that there's state-regulated signs, and that's why we have to, there are certain conditions that we have to apply them. I don't know your particular case. You don't remember who you talked to, do you? No, I don't. Okay. Why don't you leave me your name and your information afterwards, and I'll follow up with the office to see what was the particular case involving I know the school you're talking about, the corner of Whiteman and Hobart, yeah. You're right, that's a very narrow area through there, and you get a lot of commuter traffic. Now, understand, the Greenfield Bridge will be opening in a couple of months, and that will relieve some of that traffic because you are a detour.
this is not only for our students, but it's also for the public students
walking back
that get on and off the school buses at that corner.
Right.
So it's a very dangerous situation.
Leave me your name and information, and I'll follow up to see what type of response that we have going for that.
All right. With that, I want to take a moment to say thank you, panelists. I want to give our panelists a round of applause here. Thank you. And I want to say thank you again to all of our attendees. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We spend a lot of time working on these issues. We are thinking about you and your concerns every day, and it really means a lot to be able to come out and see you and hear you and talk about these concerns. So thank you for braving the terrible weather and joining us tonight. Just want to remind you one more time, please fill out your survey. You can leave it at your table with your moderator. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.